My name is Lori. I'm 28 years old, and 3 months ago I watched my parents hand over a check for $52,000 to pay for my sister Alexis's dream wedding, only for them to turn around last week and tell me I had 30 days to start covering their mortgage payments or find somewhere else to live. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story hits home, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment with your location. The same parents who swore they had no money when I needed help with college tuition somehow found $52,000 for a wedding with imported flowers, a 5-tier cake, and a venue that looked like it belonged in a magazine. But when the bills started piling up after Alexis's big day, they didn't ask her to chip in. They didn't ask her new husband Lucas, who comes from a family with more money than I'll ever see. They turned to me, the daughter they've treated like an afterthought my whole life, and said I needed to fix their financial mess or get out of their house. It's the kind of betrayal that makes you question everything you thought you knew about family, and it's why I'm telling you this story, because it's not just about money. It's about what happens when the people who are supposed to love you most put their priorities over your entire future. Let me take you back to the beginning so you can understand how we got here. Growing up in Fort Worth, Texas, in a nice neighborhood with brick houses and tidy lawns, our family looked perfect from the outside. The kind of people who went to church every Sunday, hosted barbecues for the neighbors, and always had a clean SUV parked in the driveway. My dad, Randy, worked as a commercial insurance broker, pulling in steady commissions, while my mom, Beverly, managed a high-end salon downtown, catering to clients who tipped more than I made in a week. We were solid upper-middle class, the kind of family that took annual trips to South Padre Island and never missed a school event. But inside our house there was always a clear hierarchy, and I was never at the top. Alexis, my sister, older by 2 years, was the golden child, the one who got the bigger bedroom because she needed space for her art projects, the one who got the car keys on weekends because her social life was more important, the one who got the fancy camera for her school trips because she was supposedly better at keeping things safe. I'd ask why, and my parents would say things like, "That's just how it works. Lori or Alexis has more responsibilities." I learned early on that asking questions didn't get me answers, it just got me brushed off, so I stopped asking and started keeping my head down. The wedding planning kicked off 16 months before the big day, announced over a Sunday dinner at our house, with the kind of fanfare that made it clear this was Alexis's moment. She walked into the dining room with a binder already bursting with venue photos, fabric swatches, and catering menus, and she laid it all out like she was presenting a business proposal. She'd booked a venue, a sprawling lakeside estate near Eagle Mountain Lake, with views that screamed money and a price tag to match. Her color scheme was emerald green and ivory. Her photographer was some guy who charged $5,000 for a single day, and her engagement ring from Lucas sparkled so bright it could have lit the room. "Lucas proposed last weekend," she said, holding up her hand to show off the diamond. "We're aiming for a spring wedding. Something elegant. Something people will talk about for years." My dad leaned back in his chair, grinning like she'd just won an award, and said, "That's my girl, always aiming big." "What's the budget looking like?" Alexis flipped open her binder and didn't even blink. "Based on what we want, it's going to be around $50,000 to $52,000. I almost choked on my iced tea, but nobody else seemed fazed. $52,000 was more than I'd saved in 3 years working as a social media coordinator for a chain of local gyms in Fort Worth. It was enough to buy a decent used car, put a down payment on a house, or cover a year of rent in a nice apartment. My mom reached across the table, patted Alexis's hand, and said, "That's a big number, honey, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime day. We'll figure it out." I sat there waiting for someone to ask what I thought, to maybe consider if spending that kind of money was insane, when my parents had been complaining about tight finances for months, but nobody looked my way. It was like I wasn't even at the table. Instead, they started talking about payment plans, about how Lucas's family, who owned a chain of hardware stores in Oklahoma, would expect a certain level of class, about how this wedding needed to make a statement. Lucas's parents are flying in from Tulsa, Alexis said. His dad's got 3 stores and his mom runs a charity board. We can't look cheap. My dad nodded like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. We'll make it happen, he said. For our daughter's big day, we'll find a way. That moment set the tone for everything that followed. The next year was a blur of wedding chaos that took over our entire family. My parents started cutting corners everywhere to fund it. Dad took on extra clients working late nights to close deals. Mom picked up weekend shifts at the salon even though she'd always said she hated working Sundays. They canceled our annual beach trip saying it was too expensive this year. They stopped going out to eat, which had been a Friday night tradition forever. Even the dishwasher, which had been acting up for months, just got ignored with a pile of dirty plates stacking up in the sink. Meanwhile, Alexis quit her part-time job at a boutique to focus on wedding planning full-time, like it was her actual career. She'd come home every day with bags of samples, invitation designs, centerpiece mock-ups, talking about how she needed everything to be perfect. I was working 40 hours a week at my job managing Instagram accounts and scheduling posts for gym promotions, trying to save enough to move out of my parents' house and get my own place. I'd been promoted once, which felt like a big deal, and I was finally starting to feel like I could build a life of my own, but watching this wedding take over everything made me feel like I was on the outside of my own family. The first real slap in the face came with the wedding invitation itself. It arrived in the mail, this heavy cream-colored card with gold lettering that probably cost $10 a pop. I opened it expecting to feel some kind of excitement for my sister, but instead, I saw my name printed wrong, Ms. Lori Miller and guest. 28 years of being their daughter, living in the same house, sharing the same last name, and they couldn't even spell my name right. I stared at that invitation, running my fingers over the fancy paper, and it hit me hard that this was how they saw me, or rather, how they didn't see me at all. It wasn't just a typo. It was a symbol of my place in the family, always secondary, always an afterthought. I wanted to call Alexis out to ask why nobody bothered to double-check something so basic, but I didn't. I'd learned a long time ago that pointing out stuff like that just made me the bad guy, the one who was making a fuss over nothing. Things got worse when my mom pulled me aside one evening in October, about 6 months into the wedding planning. I was at the kitchen table working on a client's social media campaign when she said, "Lori, we need to talk about your bridesmaid dress." I looked up, already dreading where this was going. Alexis picked out custom dresses from a shop in Dallas, she said. They're $300 each plus alterations. $300 for a dress I'd wear for one day, plus probably another $100 for tailoring, not to mention the bachelorette party Alexis was planning in New Orleans, which was shaping up to be a 4-day extravaganza with private bar crawls and a rented party bus. I did the math in my head, and it was close to $1,000 total money I didn't have lying around when I was trying to save for an apartment deposit. "That's a lot," I said, keeping my voice calm. My mom's face tightened like I'd just insulted her personally. "This is important to Alexis," she said. "She wants everything to look perfect. Can't you support your sister?" I wanted to say that supporting my sister shouldn't mean draining my savings, but the way she looked at me like I was being selfish for even questioning it shut me down. I ordered the dress the next day, watching my bank account take a hit that made my stomach twist. By Christmas, the wedding had taken over every corner of our lives. Alexis's bridal shower was planned for February with 40 guests and a catered brunch at a fancy hotel that cost more than my monthly rent. My parents didn't put up a single decoration that year, saying they were too busy with wedding stuff, but I knew the real reason was money. They were stretched thin, and it showed. Dad started looking worn out, popping antacids like candy after dinner. Mom's voice got sharp whenever anyone mentioned bills, like she was one question away from snapping. But Alexis, she was thriving, floating through dress fittings and cake tastings like she was starring in her own reality show. I kept working extra hours, picking up freelance gigs to cover my part in this wedding circus, skipping nights out with friends to save cash, all while watching my dream of moving out slip further away. It wasn't just the money. It was the feeling that my life was being put on hold so Alexis could have her perfect moment. The breaking point came in early March, about a month before the wedding. I was in the kitchen reheating leftovers after a long day at work when I overheard my parents talking in the living room. Their voices were low, but I could hear the strain. "The caterer needs the final payment by next week," my mom said. "That's $10,000. My dad sighed, sounding exhausted. "I've got one commission check coming, but it won't hit until the end of the month. The florist is still waiting on their deposit, too." I stood there holding my plate, listening to them stress about money they didn't have for a wedding they couldn't afford, and it hit me that nobody had ever cared when I said the bridesmaid dress was too expensive. They'd made me feel like I was the problem for even bringing it up, but now here they were scrambling to cover costs they'd known about for months. The next morning, I tried talking to Alexis. She was in her room surrounded by wedding magazines and a laptop open to a Pinterest board with hundreds of pins for table settings and lighting ideas. "Hey," I said, sitting on her bed. "Can we talk about the wedding budget?" Her smile dropped instantly, like I'd just ruined her day. "What about it?" she said, her tone sharp. "It's just, Mom and Dad are struggling to pay for everything," I said. "Maybe we could cut back on some stuff, keep the vibe, but save some money." She shut her laptop and stared at me, her eyes narrowing. "Are you seriously telling me to cheap out on my wedding?" she said. "This is the biggest day of my life, Lori. Lucas's family expects a certain standard. I'm not serving supermarket cupcakes to prove a point." I tried to explain that I was worried about our parents, that they were working themselves ragged, but she cut me off. "They want this for me," she said. "They're happy to do it. Why can't you just be supportive?" That conversation ended with me walking out feeling like I'd just been told my concern for our family's finances was a personal attack on her happiness. The weeks before the wedding were a whirlwind of last-minute expenses and tension. The final invoice came in at $52,000, a number I saw on a piece of paper my dad left on the kitchen counter, marked "paid" in his handwriting. $52,000 for one day, for flowers that would die, food that would be gone, and photos that would sit in a drawer. The day of the wedding. Alexis walked down the aisle in a dress that cost more than my car, surrounded by emerald green decorations, and a crowd of 200 guests, including Lucas's family, who looked like they'd stepped out of a country club catalog. My parents beamed like this was their proudest moment, but I could see the exhaustion in their eyes, the weight of what they'd given up to make it happen. I stood there in my overpriced bridesmaid dress, smiling for the photos, but all I could think about was how none of this felt like love or celebration. It felt like a performance, a show to prove something to people who didn't even matter. The reception was flawless, with a live band, a custom cocktail menu, and a dessert bar that probably cost $1,000 on its own. Lucas's family mingled with ours, but there was a distance, like they were judging every detail to see if we measured up. I spent most of the night watching my parents, noticing how my dad kept checking his phone, probably for work messages, even during the toasts. How my mom's laugh sounded forced when guests complimented the venue. Alexis and Lucas left for their honeymoon in the Bahamas, a 2-week trip paid for by his parents, while the rest of us went back to Fort Worth to face the fallout. The bills started arriving within days: extra charges for last-minute upgrades, overtime for the catering staff, fees for the venue's cleanup crew. My dad's face got grayer with every envelope he opened, and my mom started staying late at the salon, picking up every shift she could get. 3 weeks after the wedding, I got a text from my dad while I was at work editing a Jim's Instagram post. "Family meeting tonight. Be home by 7. Those words sent a chill through me. Family meetings in our house were never about good news. They were for big problems, like when Dad's company downsized and he had to take a pay cut, or when Mom had a health scare a few years back. I got home that night and my parents were waiting in the living room, sitting on opposite ends of the couch like they'd rehearsed this. "Sit down, Lori," My mom said, her voice calm but firm. My dad cleared his throat, a habit he had when he was about to say something heavy. "We need to talk about some changes," he said. "The wedding was incredible, but it cost more than we planned. Our mortgage payments went up with the new interest rates, and we've got some medical bills from my back surgery last year that insurance didn't fully cover. We're in a tight spot." I waited, knowing there was more coming. My mom picked up where he left off. "You're 28 with a good job and a steady income," she said. "We think it's time you took on more responsibility around here. We'd like you to cover the mortgage payments, about $1,500 a month." I stared at them, trying to process what they were asking. $1,500 a month was almost double what I'd budgeted for an apartment. It would wipe out my savings, kill my plans to move out, and leave me barely scraping by after my car payment and other bills. "That's a lot of money," I said, keeping my voice steady. My dad frowned like I'd disappointed him. "It's manageable on your salary," he said. "This house will be yours and Alexis's someday, so it's an investment." I wanted to laugh, but it wasn't funny. An investment? For a house I didn't own, for a family that had just spent $52,000 on a wedding while I was pinching pennies to build my own life. "What's the alternative?" I asked, already, knowing I wouldn't like the answer. My mom's eyes met mine, cold and direct. "If you can't help out, you'll need to find your own place," she said. "We can't keep supporting you when we're struggling ourselves." Supporting me? I'd been paying for my own phone, my own car, my own everything since I graduated college. I wasn't a freeloader. I was their daughter living at home to save money for my future, a future they clearly didn't care about if it didn't serve Alexis's dreams. I looked at them, waiting for some sign of guilt, some hint that they realized how unfair this was, but there was nothing. They'd made their choice, and it wasn't me. That night, lying in bed, I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about who I'd always been to them, the backup plan, the one who could be pushed aside when Alexis needed the spotlight. The wedding was over, but the real cost was just starting to hit, and I was the one they expected to pay it. So there I was, stuck in the middle of this wedding whirlwind that had taken over our family, watching my parents pour every dime they had, and some they didn't, into making sure Alexis's big day was the kind of event people in Fort Worth would talk about for years. It wasn't just the $52,000 they'd already spent. It was the way this whole thing kept growing like a monster nobody could control, and I was the only one who seemed to notice how it was tearing everything apart. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story is hitting you hard, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment with your location. The months after that family meeting where they dropped the bomb about me paying the mortgage or getting out were pure chaos, with every conversation, every weekend, every spare moment consumed by Alexis's wedding plans, while I was left scrambling to keep my own life from falling apart, trying to figure out how I'd ended up as the one who had to pay for everyone else's choices. The wedding prep went into overdrive as spring got closer. Alexis had turned our house into her personal command center, with spreadsheets taped to the fridge, color-coded schedules for dress fittings, and stacks of vendor contracts piling up on the dining room table. She'd hired a wedding planner, some woman named Karen, who charged $3,000 just to coordinate the vision, whatever that meant. Every day, Alexis was on the phone with florists, arguing about the exact shade of emerald green for the centerpieces, or meeting with caterers to finalize a menu that included things like truffle-infused appetizers and a custom dessert bar with gold-dusted chocolates. I'd come home from work exhausted from managing social media campaigns for gyms, and find her sprawled on the couch flipping through bridal magazines, talking about how she needed a second photographer to capture candid moments for an extra $2,000. My parents didn't blink at any of this. Dad would just nod and say, "Whatever makes it special, sweetheart," while Mom would chime in with, "This is your day, Alexis. We'll make it perfect." Meanwhile, I was eating ramen for dinner 3 nights a week to save money after shelling out for that $300 bridesmaid dress. I tried to keep my head down, focusing on my job at the gym chain where I was juggling Instagram posts, TikTok videos, and email campaigns to boost memberships. It wasn't glamorous, but I was good at it. And I'd been saving every extra dollar for an apartment deposit, dreaming of a place where I could have my own space, my own life away from the constant drama of our house. But every time I checked my bank account, I felt the weight of this wedding pulling me further from that goal. The bachelorette party was the next hit. Alexis decided New Orleans wasn't enough. She wanted a 5-day trip complete with a private jazz band for one night, a spa day, and a rented yacht for a sunset cruise. My share of the costs came to $800, not including flights or meals. I brought it up with Mom one night, hoping she'd see how insane this was getting. $800 is a lot for me right now, I said, standing in the kitchen while she chopped vegetables for dinner. She didn't even look up. Lori, this is for your sister's happiness, she said, her voice sharp. You can't put a price on family. I wanted to scream that they'd already put a price on it, $52,000 to be exact, but I just nodded and walked away, knowing arguing was pointless. The financial strain was starting to show everywhere. Dad was working insane hours, taking on new clients to cover the wedding costs, coming home after 10 at night, looking like he'd aged a decade. Mom started skipping her book club, saying she needed to pick up extra shifts at the salon. They stopped fixing things around the house, the leaky faucet in the bathroom, the wobbly back door that never closed right. I overheard them arguing one night about a credit card bill that had gone to collections, something about a balance they hadn't paid off from the venue deposit. We'll figure it out, Dad said, his voice heavy. We always do. But they weren't figuring it out, not really. They were just digging a deeper hole, and I could see it even if they refused to admit it. I tried talking to Alexis again, thinking maybe she'd see how this was affecting everyone. I found her in the living room, surrounded by sample place cards and ribbon samples, her phone buzzing with texts from her planner. Hey, I said, sitting on the couch. Can we talk about the budget again? Mom and Dad are killing themselves to pay for this. She rolled her eyes, not even looking up from her phone. They want to do this for me, Lori, she said. Why do you keep making it a problem? I pressed harder, probably more than I should have. They're skipping bills, Alexis. This isn't sustainable. She finally looked at me, her face hard. This is my wedding, not your business, she snapped. If you can't handle it, maybe you shouldn't come. That shut me up, not because I was scared, but because it was clear she didn't care about anyone but herself. By February, the wedding had sucked up every ounce of energy in our house. Alexis's bridal shower was at a rooftop venue in downtown Fort Worth, with a custom cocktail menu and a dessert table that looked like it belonged in a movie. The bill for that alone was $4,000, and I knew because I saw the invoice when Mom left it on the counter. I was working overtime, taking on freelance projects to cover my share of the wedding expenses, missing out on sleep and any kind of social life just to keep up. My savings, which had been creeping toward $5,000, were now down to barely $2,000 after the dress, the bachelorette trip, and a wedding gift. I felt obligated to buy a crystal vase that cost $200 and probably ended up in a closet somewhere. I started feeling like I was drowning, like every dollar I earned was going to this wedding instead of my own future. And the whole time, nobody asked how I was doing. Nobody checked if I was okay with spending money I didn't have. It was always about Alexis, about making sure her day was perfect, about impressing Lucas's family, who apparently needed to see us throw around cash to believe we were good enough. The closer we got to the wedding, the more I felt like I was watching my family from the outside, like I was a stranger in my own home. Alexis was glowing, thriving on the attention, while my parents were falling apart, trying to keep up with her demands. I tried one last time to get through to my dad, catching him alone in his office one evening, surrounded by paperwork and a calculator. Dad, I said, standing in the doorway, this wedding is killing you and Mom. Can't we scale back even a little? He looked up, his eyes tired but defensive. Lori, this is what families do, he said. We support each other. Alexis deserves this. I wanted to ask why her happiness was worth $52,000, but mine wasn't worth a conversation, but I didn't. I just nodded and left, knowing I'd never get through to him. That was when I started to realize this wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about who they valued, and it wasn't me. The wedding day itself was everything Alexis wanted. The venue at Eagle Mountain Lake was stunning with emerald green linens and ivory flowers everywhere, a 5-tier cake that probably cost as much as my car, and a string quartet playing during the ceremony. Alexis walked down the aisle in a dress that shimmered under the lights, her smile so perfect it could have been on a billboard. Lucas stood at the altar looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine, his parents in the front row, wearing designer outfits that screamed money. My parents were there too, smiling for the cameras, but I could see the strain in their faces, the way Dad's shoulders slumped when he thought nobody was watching, the way Mom's hands fidgeted with her purse during the reception. I stood with the other bridesmaids, forcing a smile in my overpriced dress, feeling like I was playing a role in someone else's story. The reception had everything open: bar, gourmet food stations, a dance floor with a DJ who probably charged $1,000 an hour. Lucas's family mingled with ours, but it was clear they were in a different league, their polite smiles hiding a kind of judgment I could feel from across the room. I spent most of the night watching, not really participating. I noticed how my parents kept checking their phones, probably for work emails or bank alerts. I saw Alexis laughing with her friends, completely oblivious to the cost of every detail around her. I overheard one of Lucas's relatives talking about how tasteful the wedding was, like it was some kind of test we'd passed. By the end of the night, I was exhausted, not from dancing or celebrating, but from carrying the weight of knowing what this day had cost, not just in dollars, but in the way it had fractured our family. Alexis and Lucas left for their Bahamas honeymoon, a gift from his parents, while the rest of us went home to face the real world. The first bill showed up 2 days later, a final catering invoice with extra charges for last-minute menu changes. I saw it on the kitchen counter, $3,000 more than expected, and my dad just stared at it, his face blank, like he didn't know how to process it anymore. The next few weeks were a slow-motion disaster. More bills kept coming: $500 for extra photography hours, $1,000 for the florist's rush delivery, another $1,000 for venue cleanup fees. My parents started avoiding eye contact with me, like they knew what was coming but didn't want to say it out loud. Mom was working so many hours at the salon she barely came home before 9. Dad started getting calls from creditors, his voice low and tense when he answered. I kept working, trying to rebuild my savings, but every freelance gig I took felt like a drop in the bucket compared to what my parents were dealing with. I started looking at apartments online just to see what was out there, but the prices in Fort Worth were brutal: $900 a month for a 1-bedroom in a decent area, plus deposits and utilities. I could afford it barely, but it would mean starting over with nothing. No safety net. No savings, just to escape a house where I was being asked to pay for my sister's dream wedding. One night, about a month after the wedding, I came home late from work and found my mom in the kitchen sorting through a stack of bills. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, her eyes red from staring at numbers too long. I tried to talk to her to see if there was any way to fix this without me having to give up everything. "Mom," I said, sitting at the table, "how are you guys going to manage all this debt?" She sighed, pushing the papers aside. "We'll handle it, Lori," she said, but her voice was flat, like she didn't believe it herself. "I just don't understand why I'm the one being asked to fix it," I said. "Alexis isn't contributing anything, and she's the one who wanted this wedding." Mom's face hardened the way it always did when I challenged the family script. "Alexis is starting her new life," she said. "You're here with a job, living in our house. It's time you stepped up." That was it, the moment I knew they weren't going to back down. They'd spent $52,000 on Alexis's wedding, and now I was the one who had to make it right, or they'd kick me out. It wasn't just unfair, it was a betrayal, the kind that cuts so deep you can't ever look at your family the same way again. The moment my mom told me I had to start paying $1,500 a month for their mortgage or find somewhere else to live, Everything in our family changed for me, like a switch flipped, and I saw them for who they really were. People who'd spent $52,000 on Alexis's dream wedding without a second thought, but expected me to sacrifice my entire future to clean up their mess. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story is making you mad, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment with your location. Those weeks after the wedding were when the real fallout hit, with bills piling up, my parents dodging creditors, and me stuck in the middle, trying to figure out how I'd become the bad guy for wanting to keep my own life intact. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the betrayal, the way they'd made it clear that Alexis's happiness was worth more than mine, and how they were ready to push me out if I didn't fall in line with their demands. The days after that family meeting felt like walking through a minefield. I went to work every day, managing social media for the gym chain, posting workout videos and membership deals, but my mind was somewhere else, replaying that conversation over and over. $1,500 a month was more than I could handle without giving up everything: my savings, my plans to move out, my chance at a life that wasn't tied to my parents' bad decisions. I'd look at my bank account down to less than $2,000 after all the wedding expenses and feel this knot in my stomach, knowing I was one paycheck away from being broke if I agreed to their plan. At home, things were tense. My dad barely talked to me, just gave me these disappointed looks when we passed in the hallway. My mom was worse. She'd make little comments like, "It'd be nice if everyone pitched in around here," while she sorted through stacks of bills at the kitchen table. I wanted to yell that I'd already pitched in, that I'd spent nearly $1,000 on Alexis's wedding, but it was clear they didn't see it that way. To them, I was the one who needed to step up, not Alexis, who was off in the Bahamas with Lucas, posting Instagram stories of beach sunsets and cocktails. I tried talking to Alexis when she got back from her honeymoon, thinking maybe she'd see how unfair this was. I called her one evening, catching her while she was unpacking in the fancy condo Lucas's parents had helped them buy. "Hey," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "Have you talked to Mom and Dad about their money problems?" She laughed like I'd told a joke. "They're fine, Lori. They always figure it out." I pushed harder, probably too hard. "They're not fine. They're asking me to pay $1,500 a month for their mortgage because of the wedding." There was a pause, and then she said, "That's between you and them. I'm starting my new life with Lucas. I can't deal with their drama right now." I couldn't believe it. She'd gotten her $52,000 wedding, her perfect day, and now she was acting like it was my job to fix the fallout. "You don't think you should help?" I asked. Her voice got sharp, like I'd crossed a line. "I'm not the one living in their house rent-free," she said. "Maybe it's time you grew up." She hung up before I could say anything else, and I sat there staring at my phone, feeling like I'd been punched. Rent-free, I'd been paying for my own car, my own phone, my own everything since college, and I'd only stayed at home to save money for my own place. But to Alexis, I was just a freeloader who didn't deserve a say. That conversation made it clear nobody was going to back me up. My parents had already decided I was the solution to their problems, and Alexis was too busy playing perfect wife to care. I started looking at apartments more seriously, spending my lunch breaks scrolling through listings in Fort Worth. The cheapest places were $900 a month, and that was for tiny studios in sketchy areas with no parking. With deposits and utilities, I'd need at least $3,000 upfront, which would wipe out my savings completely. I'd be starting from zero with no cushion, no safety net, just to get away from a family that thought I owed them for existing. But the alternative, paying $1,500 a month for their mortgage, wasn't any better. It would trap me in their house, working to keep them afloat, while they kept prioritizing Alexis. I'd lie awake at night doing math in my head, trying to figure out if I could make either option work. But every scenario ended with me losing something: my savings, my independence, my future. About a month after the wedding, things got worse. I came home one night to find my dad on the phone with a creditor, his voice low and tense, promising to make a payment by the end of the week. My mom was in the kitchen staring at a stack of overdue notices, her face drawn and tired. I tried to talk to them again, hoping maybe they'd see reason. "Can we sit down and go over the budget?" I asked, standing in the doorway. My dad looked up annoyed. "We're handling it, Lori," he said. "We just need you to do your part." My part? I wanted to scream that my part shouldn't mean giving up everything I'd worked for, but I kept my voice steady. $1,500 a month is more than I can afford, I said. I'm trying to save for my own place. My mom's head snapped up, her eyes cold. "This is your home, Lori," she said. "If you're not going to help, you can find somewhere else to live." It was the same ultimatum, but this time it felt final, like they'd drawn a line, and I was on the wrong side of it. I started pulling away after that, not just emotionally, but physically. I spent less time at home, staying late at work to avoid the tension. My job at the gym chain was the one thing keeping me sane. I was good at it. My campaigns were bringing in new members, and my boss, a guy named Mark, had started hinting at a possible promotion to senior coordinator, which would come with a small raise. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to, a reminder that I was building something for myself, even if my family didn't see it. I'd sit at my desk editing videos or scheduling posts and think about what it would be like to have my own apartment, my own space, where nobody could demand I pay for their mistakes. But every time I checked my bank account, reality hit hard. The wedding had drained me, and now my parents were asking for more, like I was their personal ATM. The tension at home kept building. One night I overheard my parents talking about taking out a second mortgage to cover their debts. "It's the only way," my dad said, his voice heavy. "Unless Lori steps up." My mom sighed. "She's being selfish," she said. "After everything we've done for her." Selfish? I'd spent my own money on Alexis's wedding, worked overtime to keep up, given up my social life to save what little I could. And they were calling me selfish for not wanting to pay their mortgage. I wanted to barge in and tell them exactly what I thought, but I didn't. Instead, I went to my room and started packing a small bag, just essentials, in case I needed to leave fast. It wasn't a plan, not really, just a way to feel like I had some control over my life. I decided to try one last time to get through to my parents. I caught them on a Saturday morning, both of them in the living room, surrounded by more bills and a calculator. "Can we talk?" I said, sitting on the couch. My dad nodded, but his face was guarded, like he was bracing for a fight. "I can't pay $1,500 a month," I said. "It's not just the money, it's that I didn't create this problem. You guys spent $52,000 on Alexis's wedding, and now I'm the one who has to fix it. That's not fair." My mom's face tightened and she leaned forward. "Fair," she said. "We've given you a home, food, everything you needed for 28 years. Now we're asking for help, and you're making it about fairness." My dad chimed in, his voice low. "This is family, Lori. We stick together. Alexis is starting her life with Lucas. You're here with a job. It's your turn to contribute." I looked at them, waiting for some sign they understood how crazy this was, but they just stared back like I was the one letting them down. That was the moment I knew I had to make a choice. I could stay, pay their mortgage, and watch my dreams of independence disappear, or I could leave, start over with nothing, and build a life that was mine. I went back to my room and started looking at apartments again, this time with a new kind of focus. I wasn't just browsing anymore, I was planning. I found a listing for a one-bedroom place in a decent part of Fort Worth. $950 a month, utilities included. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, with a small balcony and a parking spot. The deposit was 1 month's rent, which I could just barely cover if I used every penny I had left. I filled out the application that night, my fingers moving fast on my laptop, like if I hesitated, I'd lose my nerve. The landlord called the next day to say I'd been approved and I could move in the following weekend. I hung up the phone and felt this strange mix of relief and fear, like I'd just made a decision that would change everything. I didn't tell my parents right away. I needed a few days to get my head around it, to make sure I wasn't acting out of anger. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. They'd spent $52,000 on a wedding without asking me, without thinking about what it would do to our family, and now they were demanding I give up my future to fix their mistakes. It wasn't just unfair, it was wrong. The kind of wrong that sticks with you, that makes you question every memory of family dinners and holidays, and moments you thought meant something. I started packing my things quietly, a few boxes at a time, moving clothes and books into my car when nobody was around. I didn't want a big confrontation, not because I was scared, but because I was done trying to make them see my side. They'd made their choice when they wrote that check for Alexis's wedding, and now I was making mine. The day I told them I was moving out, I found them in the kitchen, going over more bills. I stood in the doorway holding the apartment lease I'd just signed. "I need to talk to you," I said. They looked up surprised, like they hadn't expected me to have an answer so soon. "I found a place," I said. "I'm moving out this weekend." My mom's face fell like I'd betrayed her. "Lori, you don't have to do this," she said. "We can work something out." But her voice wasn't warm, it was desperate, like she knew they were out of options. My dad leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight. "You're just going to leave us to deal with this," he said. "After everything we've done for you, I wanted to list every sacrifice I'd made, every dollar I'd spent on their daughter's wedding, every time I'd been pushed aside for Alexis, but I didn't. Instead, I said, you spent $52,000 on a wedding. You figured that out. You'll figure this out too." I walked out of the kitchen, leaving the lease on the counter, and started loading the last of my boxes into my car. Moving day was a blur. I'd hired a couple of guys from a local moving company to help with the furniture, my bed, a desk, a few things I'd bought myself over the years. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make a home. Alexis showed up just as I was closing the trunk of my car, pulling into the driveway in her shiny new SUV, looking like she'd just stepped out of a salon. "You're really doing this?" she said, crossing her arms. "You're leaving because you don't want to help Mom and Dad." I turned to face her, the sister who'd always gotten everything she wanted, who'd never had to question her place in the family. "I'm leaving because I'm done paying for your choices," I said. "You got your $52,000 wedding. I get to have my life." Her face twisted like she couldn't believe I'd talked to her that way. "You're being selfish," she said. "Family means helping each other." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. "Family means a lot of things," I said, "but it doesn't mean I owe you my future." I got in my car and drove away, not looking back. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew if I did, I might second-guess everything. That first night in my new apartment was quiet, just me, and a few boxes in a space that felt both empty and full of possibility. I sat on the floor eating takeout from a nearby taco place and felt something I hadn't in years: freedom. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't easy. I'd spent every dollar I had to move in, and my bank account was basically zero, but for the first time I was making choices for myself, not for my parents, not for Alexis, not for anyone else. I knew the fight wasn't over. They'd probably try to guilt me back to make me feel like I'd abandoned them, but I also knew I'd made the right decision. They'd crossed a line asking me to pay for their mistakes, and there was no going back from that. Not now, not ever. Moving into that tiny apartment in Fort Worth felt like taking my first real breath in years, like I'd finally broken free from a house where I was expected to pay for everyone else's choices. But the relief didn't last long because my family wasn't done trying to pull me back into their mess. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story is making you feel something, make sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment with your location. I'd left my parents' house after they demanded I cover $1,500 a month for their mortgage, a debt they'd racked up because of Alexis's $52,000 dream wedding. And now I was starting over with nothing but a few boxes and a bank account that was basically empty, trying to build a life that was mine, while they kept finding ways to make me feel like I'd betrayed them for choosing myself. It was exhausting fighting to keep my boundaries when every call, every text, every guilt trip was designed to make me feel like I owed them something, but I was done being their financial fix, and I was determined to prove I could make it without them. That first month in the apartment was tough. The place was small, just a one-bedroom with a tiny balcony and a kitchen that could barely fit 2 people, but it was mine. I'd spent every dollar I had on the $950 deposit and first month's rent, which left me with less than $200 to my name. I bought a cheap mattress and a second-hand table from a thrift store, and I lived off instant noodles and coffee while I waited for my next paycheck. Work became my lifeline. I threw myself into my job at the gym chain managing social media campaigns that were starting to get noticed. My boss Mark called me into his office one day and said, "Lori, your latest campaign doubled our signups this month. I'm putting you up for senior coordinator. It comes with a raise about $2,000 more a year." It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to make me feel like I was moving forward, like I could actually build something for myself without my family's shadow hanging over me. But the calls from my family didn't stop. About 2 weeks after I moved out, my mom left a voicemail while I was at work. "Lori, it's Mom." She said, her voice tight, like she was trying to sound calm but failing. "We're struggling with the mortgage. The bank's calling every day. Can you call me back? We need to talk." I listened to it 3 times sitting in my car during my lunch break, feeling that familiar knot in my stomach. They were still acting like I was the answer to their problems, like I hadn't just moved out to escape that exact pressure. I didn't call her back, not because I didn't care, but because I knew what she'd say. It'd be the same guilt trip, the same story about how family sticks together, how I was letting them down by not helping. A few days later, my dad texted me, "Lori, we could lose the house. Please think about what you're doing." I stared at that message for a long time, wondering how they could still think I owed them after they'd spent $52,000 on a wedding without blinking. Alexis was the worst. She called me one night while I was unpacking boxes in my apartment, trying to make the place feel like home. "Hey," she said, her voice bright, like nothing was wrong. "Mom told me you moved out. What's going on with you?" I wasn't in the mood for her fake concern. "I moved out because they wanted me to pay their mortgage," I said. "You know, the one they can't afford because of your wedding." She laughed like I was being dramatic. "Come on, Lori, it's not my fault they spent that money. They wanted to do it for me. Why are you making such a big deal?" I couldn't believe she was still acting like none of this was her responsibility. "It's a big deal because they're asking me to fix it," I said. "Why aren't you helping?" Her tone changed, got sharp. "I'm married now. I have my own life. You're the one who's supposed to step up." I hung up before I said something I'd regret, but that conversation stuck with me, the way she dismissed everything like my life didn't matter, as long as she got her perfect moment. I started avoiding their calls after that, letting them go to voicemail, but the messages kept coming. My mom would leave long rambling ones about how disappointed they were, how they'd raised me to be better than this. My dad's were shorter, just things like, "We need to talk, Lori. This isn't right." Even my Aunt Linda, my mom's sister, got involved, texting me one day to say, "Your parents are in trouble. You're doing well at work, right? Maybe you could help out just a little." I didn't respond to her either. It wasn't just the money they were asking for, it was the way they made it sound like I was a bad daughter, a bad sister for wanting to keep what I'd worked for. I'd spent years saving, scraping by giving up things I wanted to fit into their idea of family, and now they were acting like I was the one who'd failed them. Work was the only place I felt like I had any control. The promotion to senior coordinator came through a month after I moved out, and with it a raise. That meant I could finally start rebuilding my savings. I took on more freelance projects, creating social media content for local businesses, which brought in an extra $500 a month. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start furnishing my apartment, to buy a couch that didn't smell like someone else's dog, to eat something other than noodles every night. I met a guy named Ethan at a coffee shop near my apartment, a graphic designer who worked freelance and understood what it was like to hustle for every dollar. We started hanging out, grabbing tacos after work, talking about our jobs and our plans. He was the first person I told the whole story to about the wedding, the mortgage, the way my family had turned on me. "That's messed up," he said, shaking his head. They spent $52,000 on a party and now you're the one who's supposed to pay for it. Hearing someone else say it out loud made it real, made me realize I wasn't crazy for feeling betrayed. But my family didn't let up. One evening, about 2 months after I moved out, I got a call from my mom while I was cooking dinner in my tiny kitchen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Lori," she said, her voice shaking, "the bank sent a foreclosure notice. We missed 2 payments. If you don't help, we could lose everything." I stood there holding a spatula trying to process what she was saying. Foreclosure. The house I'd grown up in, the one they'd said would be mine, and Alexis's someday was on the line, and they were still looking to me to save it. "How much do you need?" I asked. Not because I wanted to help, but because I needed to know how far they'd go. $2,000 to catch up, she said. And then, $1,500 a month to keep it going. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd. "You spent $52,000 on a wedding," I said. "And now you want me to pay $2,000 to fix it?" She got quiet, then said, "We're your family, Lori. Don't you care?" That was the moment I knew there was no reasoning with them. They'd never see what they'd done, never admit that they'd put Alexis's wants over everyone else's needs. I hung up and turned off my phone, done with the guilt trips, done with being their solution. The next day, I got an email from my dad, formal and cold, like he was writing to a stranger. "Lori, we're exploring legal options to ensure family support," it said. "We'd prefer to work this out privately, but you're leaving us no choice. Legal options." They were threatening to sue me, their own daughter, for not paying their mortgage. I called Ethan right away, needing someone to tell me I wasn't losing my mind. "They're threatening to sue you?" he said, his voice incredulous. "For what?" "Not bailing them out of a mess they made." I read him the email, every word of it, and he just shook his head. "You don't owe them anything," he said. "You've got your own life now. Don't let them drag you back." He was right. But it still hurt. Knowing my own parents would go that far, would rather take me to court than face the consequences of their own choices. I hired a lawyer the next week, a woman named Rachel Carter who specialized in family disputes. I found her through a coworker who'd dealt with a similar situation. Rachel read my dad's email and shook her head. "This is a bluff," she said. "They have no legal grounds to force you to pay their mortgage. It's their debt, not yours." She drafted a letter, short and to the point, stating that I had no obligation to support their financial decisions and that any attempt to pursue legal action would be met with a countersuit for harassment. I sent it to my parents' address, certified mail, along with copies of the wedding invoices. I'd kept $52,000 in receipts for flowers, catering, and photography. It felt good to lay it all out, to show them I wasn't just making this up, that their choices had consequences they couldn't pin on me. The response came faster than I expected. A week later, I got a letter from their lawyer, some guy named Paul Grayson, saying they were dropping any legal action. No apology, no acknowledgement of what they'd put me through, just a curt statement that they'd handle their finances without my involvement. But the damage was done. That letter, that threat, was the final straw. I didn't just want distance from them anymore. I wanted to be done. I blocked their numbers, my mom's, my dad's, even Alexis's. I didn't want to hear their excuses, their guilt trips, their demands. They'd shown me who they were, and I wasn't going to spend my life trying to fix a family that didn't value me. Life in my apartment started to feel like a real life, not just a reaction to their drama. Ethan and I got closer, spending weekends exploring Fort Worth, grabbing coffee at local shops, or working together on freelance projects. He helped me design a logo for a client, and I helped him with social media for his portfolio. It was the kind of partnership I'd never had with my family, where nobody expected me to sacrifice everything for them. Work was going better too. The raise from my promotion let me start saving again, slowly, a few $100s a month. I wasn't rich, but I was stable, and for the first time, every dollar I earned was mine to keep, not owed to someone else's wedding or mortgage. I started to see a future, maybe a better apartment, maybe a trip somewhere, maybe a life where I wasn't defined by what my family thought I should be. But even with my family blocked, they found ways to get to me. My Aunt Linda showed up at my apartment one Saturday unannounced with a box of cookies and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Lori," she said sitting on my couch, "your parents are in a bad spot. They're talking about selling the house." I nodded, not surprised. "They should," I said. "They can't afford it." She looked at me like she was waiting for me to offer something. "You're doing well now, aren't you?" she said. "Maybe you could help them out just enough to get them through." I set down my coffee, trying to stay calm. "They spent $52,000 on Alexis's wedding," I said. "I'm not paying for that." She sighed like I was being unreasonable. "Family's family, Lori," she said. "You don't turn your back on them." I walked her to the door, cookies and all, and told her I wasn't turning my back. I was just done being their bank account. That encounter was the last time I let anyone from my family into my space. I changed my email, got a new phone number, and made it clear to anyone who asked that I wasn't open to talking about my parents or Alexis. I was building something new, something that belonged to me, and I wasn't going to let their guilt trips tear it down. Every day I went to work, every dollar I saved, every moment I spent with Ethan or my new friends was proof that I could make it without them. They'd crossed a line not just with the money, but with the way they'd treated me like I was nothing unless I was paying their bills. That kind of betrayal doesn't just hurt, it changes you. Makes you see that family isn't always what you're told it should be. I wasn't going to forgive them, not after everything, and I was okay with that. Living on my own in that small Fort Worth apartment with nobody demanding I pay for their mistakes felt like I'd finally taken control of my life. But it wasn't just about escaping the $52,000 wedding debt my family tried to pin on me. It was about building something that was mine, something they couldn't touch, no matter how hard they tried to guilt me back. Tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story's got you thinking about your own family drama, make sure to subscribe, and drop a comment with your location. The past year had shown me what my parents and Alexis were really about, choosing a lavish wedding over our family's stability, and then expecting me to clean up their mess with $1,500 a month I didn't have, and cutting them off completely was the only way I could protect my future, my peace, and the person I was becoming. This is the part of the story where I tell you how I moved forward, how I found success and happiness without them, and why I'll never forgive them for what they did, because some betrayals are too deep to fix no matter how much time passes. The first few months after I blocked my family's numbers were quiet, almost too quiet, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'd wake up in my apartment, make coffee in my tiny kitchen, and go to work at the gym chain, where things were starting to take off. My promotion to senior coordinator came with more responsibility, managing bigger campaigns, training new hires, and pitching ideas directly to the owners. My boss, Mark, pulled me aside one day and said, "Lori, you're killing it. We're launching a new branch in Dallas, and I want you to lead the marketing rollout. It's a big step, comes with a $10,000 raise." $10,000 a year wasn't life-changing, but it was enough to make my budget less tight, to let me buy a decent chair for my desk, or take Ethan out for dinner without checking my bank account first. I threw myself into the new role, creating ads that went viral on TikTok, bringing in hundreds of new members and earning praise from people who saw me for my work, not as someone who owed them something. Ethan became a bigger part of my life too. We'd spend evenings working side by side at my apartment, him designing logos, me scheduling social media posts, sharing takeout, and talking about our dreams. He'd been through his own family drama. His parents had pushed him to take over their small business, but he'd chosen his own path, so he got it when I told him I was done with mine. One night, over tacos from a food truck near my place, I told him about the legal threat, how my parents had actually considered suing me for not paying their mortgage. "That's next level," he said, shaking his head. They spent $52,000 on a wedding and you're the bad guy for not bailing them out. I nodded, feeling lighter just hearing him say it. I'm not going back, I said. Not after that. He reached across the table, squeezed my hand, and said, You don't have to. You're building something better. That was the moment I knew Ethan was someone I could build a future with, someone who saw me as a person, not a solution to their problems. But my family didn't disappear completely, no matter how hard I tried to cut them off. About 6 months after I moved out, I got a letter in the mail forwarded from my old address at my parents' house. It was from my Aunt Linda, written in her neat handwriting, the kind of letter that felt like it was trying to sound nice, but had an agenda. Lori, it started. Your parents are selling the house. They can't keep up with the mortgage, and the debts from the wedding are still piling up. They're moving to a smaller place in Arlington, but they owe $25,000 to clear everything. I know things have been tough, but you're doing well now. Maybe you could help just a little. I read it twice, sitting on my couch, feeling that old anger bubble up. $25,000. They'd spent $52,000 on Alexis's wedding, threatened to kick me out when I wouldn't pay their mortgage, and now they were sending my aunt to ask for more money like I was their personal bailout fund. I tore the letter up and threw it in the trash, didn't even bother responding. If they thought they could guilt me back after everything, they were wrong. Work kept me grounded. The Dallas branch launch was a success, and the owners started talking about making me regional marketing director, a role that would come with a $20,000 raise and a company car. I was saving again, putting away $1,000 a month, enough to start thinking about a better apartment or even a small house someday. I took on more freelance projects too, building a portfolio that got me noticed by bigger companies in Fort Worth. One day, I got an email from a tech startup called Peak Pulse offering me a job as their digital marketing manager with a salary of $80,000 a year, almost double what I was making. I took Ethan to dinner to celebrate, and he raised his glass, grinning. You're unstoppable, he said. They don't know what they lost. He meant my family, and he was right. I was building something real, something they'd never valued because it didn't serve their needs. The startup job changed everything. I started in the fall, working out of a sleek office downtown, surrounded by people who were smart and driven, the kind who stayed late not because they had to, but because they loved the work. My campaigns for Peak Pulse got attention, landing U.S. features in local business journals and boosting our user base by 30% in 3 months. The money was good, but the real reward was the freedom, knowing I could pay my bills, save for the future, and still have enough to live a little, like taking Ethan on a weekend trip to Austin or buying a new laptop without stressing about the cost. I moved to a better apartment, a 1-bedroom with a bigger balcony and a view of the Fort Worth skyline, $1,500 a month, but worth every penny because it felt like home, not just a place to crash. Ethan and I started talking about moving in together, maybe getting a place with a backyard, something we could make our own. He was doing well too, landing bigger design clients, and we'd spend nights planning what our life could look like, travel, maybe starting a side business together. Things I'd never dared to dream about when I was stuck in my parents' house. But even as things got better, my family's shadow lingered. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize one evening, and when I answered, it was Alexis. Lori, she said, her voice softer than usual. I heard you got a big job. Congrats. I waited, knowing there was more. Mom and Dad are really struggling, she said. They sold the house, but they still owe money. I know you're mad, but maybe you could help, just a one-time thing. I cut her off. You got your $52,000 wedding, I said. I'm not paying for it now. She got quiet, then said, You're really going to let them lose everything? I hung up, blocked the number, and felt a kind of calm I hadn't expected. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. The next attempt came from my dad, a text from a new number a few weeks later. Lori, we're in Arlington now. Things are tough. Can we talk? I deleted it without responding. Then my mom emailed me a long message about how they were living in a cramped condo, how they were cutting corners to pay off debts, how they wished I'd reconsider helping. "We're family," she wrote. "We need you." I read it, then archived it, didn't reply. Every time they reached out, it was the same guilt pressure, no acknowledgement of what they'd done, no apology for spending $52,000 on a wedding while I was scraping by, no recognition that they had tried to sue me for not fixing their mess. They didn't see me as their daughter anymore, just a solution they could guilt into paying up, and I wasn't going to let them pull me back into that. A year after I moved out, I got a letter from a lawyer, not the same one they'd used before, but another guy named Stephen Holt. It was formal, saying my parents were exploring financial support options and wanted to discuss a family contribution plan based on my new income. I laughed when I read it, not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable. I sent it to Rachel, my lawyer, who called me the next day. "They're trying to scare you again," she said. "There's no case here. You want me to respond?" I told her to send another letter, same as before, making it clear I wasn't responsible for their debts, and any more attempts would mean legal consequences for them. She did, and that was the last I heard from their lawyers. It was like they finally got the message I wasn't their bank account and I never would be. Life kept moving forward. Ethan and I got a place together, a small house in a quiet Fort Worth neighborhood, $2,200 a month, with a backyard where we could grill on weekends. We furnished it with things we picked out together, not fancy, but ours. My job at Peak Pulse got better, another promotion this time to Director of Marketing with a salary of $110,000 a year. I was managing a team running campaigns that reached millions, and for the first time I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Ethan's freelance work took off too, and we started saving for bigger things, a trip to Europe, maybe a down payment on a house of our own. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable, and every dollar we had was earned, not owed to someone else's bad choices. I heard bits and pieces about my family through mutual friends, people who didn't know I'd cut them off. Alexis and Lucas were still together, living in their condo, but there were rumors his family's hardware stores were struggling, and they were fighting a lot. My parents were getting by in Arlington, but they'd stopped hosting big family events, probably because they couldn't afford it. I didn't feel bad for them, not after everything. They'd made their choices, $52,000 for a wedding, threats to sue me, years of treating me like I was less than Alexis. They could live with the consequences just like I'd learned to live with mine. One day, I got an invitation to a family reunion sent by my cousin Jenna, who I hadn't talked to in years. It was at a park in Fort Worth, a casual thing, but the note said my parents and Alexis would be there. I didn't go, didn't even consider it. Jenna called a week later, confused. "Why didn't you come?" she asked. "Everyone was hoping to see you." I kept it simple. "I'm not part of that family anymore," I said. "They made that clear when they asked me to pay for their mistakes." She tried to argue, saying family was forever, but I cut her off. "Family doesn't threaten to sue you," I said, and hung up. That was the last time I let anyone pull me into that conversation. Looking back, that $52,000 wedding wasn't just a party. It was the thing that showed me who my family really was. They chose Alexis's moment over our stability, over my future, and then tried to make me feel like I was the one letting them down when I wouldn't fix it. Cutting them off wasn't easy, but it was necessary, like walking away from a fire before it burns you alive. I built a life. I'm proud of a job I love, a home with Ethan, a future we're planning together. I don't regret saying no to them, not for a second. Forgiveness sounds nice, but some things can't be undone, and what they did, spending that money demanding I pay their debts, treating me like I was nothing unless I was useful, that's the kind of betrayal you don't come back from. I chose myself, and I'd do it again, every single time.